If you're completely new to digital art, maybe just recently getting your feet wet with generative tools like Midjourney and you're looking to take your images to the next level, or maybe you're a new 3D artist that so far has primarily focused on learning the core basics of 3D, things like modeling, texturing, material setups, lighting, and rendering, and haven't quite looked into post-processing as part of your workflow yet, then today I'd like to introduce you to the power of LUTs. Now, I just want to fully disclaim that if you're coming across this video on YouTube, this will completely read as an ad for my LUT pack, and that's because I was originally putting together this video as an explainer and tutorial to be dropped as an unlisted video for those who purchased my Sci-fi LUT pack coming from Patreon, Instagram, or ArtStation. So it was always intended to have that context. However, after I finished recording this video this morning and started editing it together, I realized that it also ended up having quite a bit of just general knowledge and tips useful for introducing artists to the concept of LUTs, how to go about practically installing them for the first time, and a bit of insights into why and how I use them to get the retro sci-fi looks that you know from my art, all while saving a ton of time and effort in post-production. So yeah, I just wanted to get that disclaimer out of the way. If you want to grab the pack to speed up your workflows, or maybe to get a similar look to what you see in my work, or if you've been following my work and videos for a while and just want to support my fiance and I as we save up for our wedding, then the link is in the description. But if not, the workflows and principles I'll be explaining in the video can apply to any free or premium LUTs you find online. So either way, stick around since there's still a ton of value packed into this complete beginner's tutorial. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, hello and welcome to the Future Familiar LUT pack. First off, I just wanted to thank you for checking out my art and for making your way here. I imagine if you're watching this video, you're considering picking up the pack, so I really appreciate the support. And rather than putting up a huge spammy landing page, I just thought I'd throw together more of a practical video explaining what a LUT is for those new to color grading or digital art, how and why I built this pack, and how to quickly install them in Photoshop, and to give you a preview scrolling through the different looks on a couple of test images, together with a few different tips of how I use them personally. So yeah, with that, let's get into what a LUT is. Well, as I wrote down here in the FAQ, a LUT, or a lookup table, is a tool used in photo and video editing to apply a color grade with just a single click. Essentially what it is it wraps the mapping of specific colors into a preset. Historically, LUTs have been most popularly used by photographers and video editors to really speed up their workflows as either the starting point to their editing, or in many cases when there's a time crunch, if we're being honest, as the primary part of their editing. And just to quickly address it as well, I think some newer creatives might assume LUTs are more for processing raw images or maybe log footage, since we see that a lot on YouTube. And while it's true there are what are called conversion LUTs, for example, used in Resolve to convert log footage to Rec 709 before a grade is applied, for example, often with a creative LUT applied in that process as well, as long as you can import your render or generative image into Photoshop or any other software that accepts LUTs as .cube formats, which nowadays is most software, then you're good to go. Okay, so that's what a LUT is, and before I show you how to set them up in Photoshop, I briefly wanted to touch on how and why I built this pack. Now, I assume most of you here likely aren't one of those two types of creatives I mentioned before, the videographers and photographers who usually use LUTs. You're likely either a 3D artist, maybe you're enrolled in my 3D art curriculum and are looking for a way to push your renders a bit further, or maybe you're new to digital art and are still playing with things like Midjourney using my prompt guide and are still struggling to get that exact look you're aiming for. Either way, I think LUTs are a hugely overlooked tool in both of these art spaces, since they can really take your images to the next level. Many 3D artists, once they finally get through all of the concepting, modeling, UVing, texturing, lighting, and rendering, really feel like hitting that upload button to ArtStation. And on the other end, new artists who are just getting their feet wet with digital art in Midjourney, for example, might not yet have the technical knowledge of how to even get started grading an image, or even what looks they would want to go for. If you've watched some of my past YouTube videos, then you've heard me talking about the importance of developing your taste and style as an artist. And over the past year and a half since launching Future Familiar, I've been working constantly to develop both of those areas myself. While there are countless factors of why I was able to grow from 0 to over 115,000 followers in that time, I think largely it is due to my understanding of my own taste, the consistency and evolution of my style, and of course the quality of the execution. A large part of this process was found and developed in the post-production of my visuals, in pushing the lighting and color grades in similar yet still distinctive directions. Since this takes a lot of time on many of my concepts, whenever I discover a look that I find particularly satisfying or interesting, I have been saving them as LUTs that I could repurpose as a starting point for future images. This not only saves me a ton of time, but also really increases the consistency of my images, since they are all somewhat derivative of each other. So there's an underlying red thread between them that I think really comes through if you step back and look at my collection of works as a whole. Now that I've developed quite a few of them, and given how much time they save me in post and the frequency with which I get asked how I achieve different looks on Instagram, I thought I'd finally package them up together and release them for all of you to apply to your own images. So with that intro, let's go ahead and get these installed in Photoshop, and I'll show you a few different ways of how to practically apply them and a few tips for how to get the most out of them the same way I do. Okay, so once you get the pack downloaded and unzipped, you'll be looking at a folder like this, which is super simple and straightforward. You'll have all of the 25 different LUTs in these .cube formats, and I've created a preview image which the LUT was based on here, so you can really easily see like what LUT 001 refers to. And then just for the ease of use, I've also created a master gallery here, so you can just have one image open on the side, look through the references, and then scroll through the LUTs that way, so you can easily see it without having to open up one by one. And in order to get these installed, you will go to, if you're on Windows, I'm not quite sure where it is on Mac, but I'm sure it's very similar. You will go to your drive you have Adobe installed on, go to Program Files, not x86, just Program Files, Adobe, the Adobe Photoshop version you're using. I'm using 2024. You go to the Presets folder, 3D LUTs, and then you'll be met with some that are already pre-installed with Photoshop. And I just leave these in here just for reference sake. Sometimes I'll scroll through these, but I don't really use them too often. And then you can either drag in all of the cube files in here with these 3DLs and .looks, or you can drag in a folder. They won't show up in a folder in Photoshop, but just for my sake, I've deleted out my other ones right now, but just for my sake, for organization, I drag in the whole folder of .cubes. Do not drag in the preview images, just move the preview images to a different folder and drag in all of the .cubes. You can leave them, like I said, in this folder, or just drag them in with all of the Photoshop defaults. Okay, so yeah, with that, we have LUTs installed. It's as easy as that. So before I show you how to apply the lookup tables if you've never done it before, and to scroll through the different previews, I just wanted to talk about LUTs in general. So while LUTs at their foundation could be a science to some, for myself and for many, I think what they are largely used for is to capture more of a feeling and taste, where you can scroll through different looks, and rather than trying to figure out exactly how the colors would map, you just find a look that feels good and use that as a starting point for your grade. So there's a few different ways to do that, and the first of which is to pull up here. We have the gallery. I'll open it up in PureRef, and the first way is to look and find the image that most closely resembles your render or your generative image from Midjourney. Maybe you have something that is more of a muted look. It's not too bright, and you just want to get it a little bit more moody like this. Or maybe it's something like here where you have some bright windows, you got some different LED lights, and you just want to push it more in this direction. So the first is to look for something that resembles your image, and then to push it further in that direction with one of these LUTs. The second way to use these creative LUTs is a little bit similar to the first, but almost kind of the opposite, in that instead of finding the image that most closely resembles your image, you instead can look through and find the one that has the mood and feeling that you really want to move your image towards. This will often give some surprising results, since the mappings might not be doing exactly what you'd expect given the different subject and balance of the image, but it's an excellent way to train your observational skills as a creative, since these unexpected results and the different processings will help you draw connections between a color grade applied to a reference image and how it impacts your image's highlight, shadows, and colors. The third way, which is how I use them personally, is to simply scroll through the LUTs until it feels good. And I know that sounds extremely rudimentary, but in most projects, I do already have more of a particular energy that I want to get the image to. I just don't try to decipher exactly what science would get me there. Instead, I scroll through all of my previous looks that I had created from scratch and find the one that just feels like that mood I'm going for, and then use that as a base to more strategically layer things on top of. Or other times I'm really just looking for inspiration. I have maybe a loose sense of the mood or energy, but I don't really know what I want until I see it. And these LUTs are a great tool for that discovery process. So yeah, here we are in Photoshop. You can see I've already applied a lookup table, but I'll show you how to apply one from scratch if you never have before. So we have our just JPEG opened here. And if we come down below that, we can go to here and go to color lookup. And this will add exactly what I have here. Here you have your mask, which is applied to the whole image. And here you have your LUT applied. And if you come up here to the properties window, come into load 3D LUT. And here you will have access to that same folder that we had installed them in a few moments ago in your Windows folder or over on Mac if you're doing it there. And yeah, here you can see, as I said, they won't be in subfolders. So you want to be a little bit organized in how you apply these. I didn't name them, I just numbered them. This is how I like to work. Feel free to rename them if you want. Now, before I start applying these and going through a few tips, I wanted to warn you that if you look at my library of images within the context of themselves, they do have a nice variety of moods and feelings that they're conveying. But in terms of grades, they are quite heavy-handed and is exactly what I wanted to give you in these LUTs. I didn't pull any punches and I didn't do anything to tone them down or make them universally applicable like a lot of LUT packs do, where they give you very minimal tweaks just to ensure that they kind of work everywhere. But no, these are the exact LUTs that I use. So when you apply them, be prepared. They will be very strong at first. As you scroll through them, you might need a little bit of a palette cleanser. So you might need to step away from the computer for a bit, come back and look at it fresh, since at first it can feel a little bit jarring. So yeah, with that disclaimer, let's go ahead and apply our first lookup table, and I'll show you how to scroll through the different LUTs and to make a few tweaks on top of that. Okay, so yeah, with that said, let's go ahead and start previewing some of these LUTs. I have a few tips I want to suggest of how I use them. But this will not be a full post-processing workflow. I just want to show you previews of these LUTs on 2 different images to get you started and to talk about a couple different ways that I tone them down, since they are very heavy-handed looks. So here we go. Let's go ahead and apply LUT 001. As you can see, this already looks extremely future familiar. We have gotten rid of that very typical sci-fi look with these teals and oranges, and everything is just kind of green. And yeah, we've pulled down that vibrancy. I think this is probably more contrasty than I would like this image, so this probably isn't the LUT I would go with here. Maybe I could dial it down and then layer up a couple other things. But yeah, here is LUT 001. I think let's go ahead and drag this over just to see sort of that typical before and after. You can see it's a pretty drastic change, which I really love, and I think it really gets rid of something that you would just see all the time in sci-fi, and it makes it feel very curated and art directed. And let's go ahead and scroll through some of the other ones. If you click one, as a pro tip, you can just hover over and the middle mouse wheel down them. So let's go through. And I think that what you'll notice as we go through them, that some feel really good, some feel really wrong. And I think that's okay. It just depends on whatever your image is. So this one would obviously be quite wrong for this image, unless it's what you're going for. But for me, it's pretty far off. This would be a lot closer. Again, pretty far off. This is, let's see, what is this? 006. Let's see where this was pulled from. Let's go to 006. Yes, here. So this is one of my favorite looks that I've developed. I use this all of the time. It's not a very heavy-handed look, so it is a nice starting point for most images. But it's doing some pretty interesting things to the colors. So you can see here we have that nice, clean, creamy color without too much color cast on it, but it is pulling down a lot of those teals and really leaning into more of a reddish look to the light. So I could create this for a story. Maybe it was around like alarms or alerts going off in the station and there's a malfunction, an emergency. This is a look that would help tell that story. And let's go ahead and scroll through the rest before I show you a couple ways to apply these. So again, let's click on 6 and then we can scroll through a few of them. Sometimes throughout this process, you might You might find one that you really like, but it feels pretty heavy-handed. I would really suggest if you find something that feels good, but it feels intense, just to step away from the computer and come back. Or maybe to send it as an export and look at it in context of the rest of your collection. I have to do that quite often. I'll export something that feels good and mock it up into my Instagram feed to see if it feels like it fits in the overall style that I'm developing as a collection. And yeah, that is the 25 of them on this image, and a lot of good content here. I think that what I would have gone with is something like 6, depending on the story. If you come to 1, you could go with this as well. If you like the colors, for example, but not what it's doing with the light, there's a couple ways that you can blend in these LUTs. Of course, the first is to just drag down the opacity and how much it's impacting, but another way to do that is to come into the blending mode, and with a LUT, you have access to the color and luminosity of that LUT. If you only want to apply the color, you could come down to color, and it'll pull out what it's doing to the luminosity from the image. So if we go down to luminosity, it'll be doing the opposite. You'll leave your colors alone, and it'll just be adjusting your highlights and shadows. And this is a really powerful tool to get just a particular part of the LUT onto your image. Maybe you like what it's doing to the LEDs, is blowing out the highlights in a more of like a dreamy way. Then you can apply that and leave your colors alone, or do something else to your colors entirely. So we could just use the color here, which I think helps a lot with the contrast. And yeah, that's the look for this first image. Super simple. Let's go to the second image and test out a few more looks. Here we are on the second image. You can see this is something that is pretty close to what you would see on my Instagram. I was able to get this one pretty close to the art direction I wanted, but it's not exactly the color palette or mood or feeling that I would want. The lights already feel quite good, so maybe I would just apply a color treatment on top of here. But maybe we can push them in more interesting directions. Maybe this red is a little bit distracting color, or maybe it's just too bright. And instead of tweaking it manually, throwing on a vignette or something, maybe I can achieve it in the color lookup. So let's go ahead and toggle on the one I'd added. Again, you come down here, go to color lookup. And it looks like I had applied LUT 10. And this is a very heavy-handed LUT, as you can see. It really crushed the shadows down here. They were super, super dark. And while this isn't something that I would release, maybe for you it is the particular mood you would want to do. Maybe you wanted to push this more into like an evening, maybe more somber feeling. Let's see what this is from. I can't even remember what LUT 10 is. Let's see, LUT 10. Ah, yes. So it's this more moody cafe, super industrial feeling. So this is a good example of that second approach where the image itself is quite different, right? If you were to compare this image to this image, there isn't a lot of similarities in really anything. Color, in balance. Here you have a huge open light source, very little LED lighting. Here we have just a couple LED strips, no open light source, and quite different colors. We have, look at the raw one again, a lot of bright reds, a couple different oranges, some yellows. Here all we had really were the yellow chairs and a couple terminals that were yellow as well, and this orange light back here. So what it is doing a good job of is capturing that dark mood and feeling. And maybe this is what you want to go for. I don't know. So maybe you want to leave your colors alone. Like I said, you can come in here and drop out the colors and just go with luminosity. So you are pushing the light, the highlights, and the shadows in that direction. I think that this is a very good example where you have this more muted exterior, and look what it's doing to LEDs here with the luminosity. Here you have a little bit more of a blown out look, and here it tones them down a little bit. So let's have it do something different with a different LUT. Let's see, let's go back to 1 and scroll through. Again, raw. We can drag it over, see what it's doing. It's such an interesting way to look through this. Here we have more of a bluish tint to our lights and completely gone, completely warm. And let's see, again, this is probably not what I would go with. Click here, now we can scroll wheel. I quite like this one. I quite like 4. I quite like 6 as well. I see, okay, so I'm stopping on 10 again. I am liking what it's doing with 10. I think I would go ahead and leave that on just color. I really like what it's doing to the colors, and I would leave the luminosity as it was. I felt like we were losing too much down here before, but I really like these colors. And again, step away from your computer when you're doing this, because if you look at my Instagram feed, right? If you were to pull up my Instagram feed, or let's go ahead and just pull this up again, we don't have very vibrant colors. We don't have a huge range of very bright ones. Here we have maybe a little bit more than others. So here we have a little bit more variety than others, but a lot of the images, when you look at them just within context of themselves, don't have a large variety. I think that's what really lends itself to that mood that I'm able to capture in the images, that it does feel a little bit dreamy, a little bit cozy, and nothing is too distracting or poppy or vibrant. And yeah, with that, that's how you can apply these. It's as simple as going up, selecting the LUTs, dialing in their intensity, choosing whether you want color or luminosity or both if you leave it on normal. And yeah, I hope that this helps you in your color grading journey. It is, again, just a start. You can come in and make all the adjustments you need on top of that, or just if you run out of time, like I said, a lot of artists will just pop a color LUT on top of whatever they're doing and render it out and call it a day because they just don't have time and want to move on to the next project. So I strongly recommend a mix of both, making sure that you are saving time when you need it, but also learning to observe your images and figuring out what you like in them, and sort of the looks and styles that you lean towards, and eventually building out your own LUTs. Maybe I'll do a tutorial on that someday. But for now, that's it. That's the first LUT pack for Future Familiar. I hope you enjoy it, and please tag me in your images. If you post them, I would love to check out what you create. So yeah, have a good one, everyone.